Communism for me but not for thee. How corporate oligarchy disguised itself as laissez-faire capitalism. In the American political imagination, capitalism and communism stand as irreconcilable opposites. One represents freedom, competition, and merit. The other, coercion, stagnation, and bureaucratic tyranny. Yet a closer examination of the modern American economy reveals a paradox so glaring it borders on the absurd. The largest corporations and wealthiest individuals operate according to principles that would make a Soviet central planner blush, while insisting that everyone else must submit to the ruthless discipline of the free market. This is not capitalism as its philosophers envisioned it. It is something older and more durable, a corporate oligarchy that has learned to speak the language of laissez-faire while practicing a privatized form of collectivism for the elite. The cognitive dissonance begins with the most basic feature of corporate life, limited liability. When an entrepreneur incorporates a business, they create a legal fiction, a person that can own property, enter contracts, and commit crimes, yet cannot be imprisoned and whose owners cannot lose more than their initial investment. This is not the rugged individualism of the frontier. It is a collectivization of risk, a socialization of failure. The corporation is, in essence, a commune of capital. Shareholders pool their resources, share in the profits, and are shielded from the consequences of their collective actions. When Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008, its executives did not face debtor's prison. The losses were absorbed by the broader economy, by homeowners, pensioners, and taxpayers, while the profits had been privatized for years. The corporation demands the freedom to succeed and the right to socialize its failures. This is not market discipline. It is heads I win, tails you loseism, dressed in a Brooks Brothers suit. The oligarchy's appetite for collectivism extends far beyond liability shields. Consider the American defense industry, where public-private partnership has become a euphemism for guaranteed profits at public expense. Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon do not compete in any meaningful sense. They receive cost-plus contracts where the government reimburses expenses and adds a guaranteed margin. They benefit from publicly funded research and development, NASA, DARPA, the national laboratories, that they then monetize through proprietary patents. Their workforce is trained at public universities and their global reach is secured by the American military, funded by taxpayers. When these firms fail to deliver, when the F-35 fighter jet runs $80 billion over budget and a decade behind schedule, there are no market consequences. The contracts keep flowing. The executives keep bonuses. The market here is a theatrical production, with competition as a scripted line and the federal treasury as the endless budget. Agriculture tells the same story. American farmers, particularly large agribusiness conglomerates, receive billions in subsidies, crop insurance, and disaster relief. The family farm mythology persists, but the beneficiaries are increasingly corporations like Tyson, Cargill, and Archer Daniels Midland. They demand free trade when it opens foreign markets to their grain and protectionism when imports threaten their margins. They preach self-reliance while lobbying for ethanol mandates that force consumers to buy their product. The market is a la carte, and they order only the courses that profit them. The technology sector, celebrated as the purest expression of American entrepreneurial genius, reveals the same pattern. Silicon Valley did not emerge from a garage into a vacuum. It grew from Pentagon spending, NSF grants, Stanford's federally funded research, and the government's deliberate creation of the Internet. Google, Amazon, and Apple built empires on public infrastructure, roads, courts, patent systems, trade agreements, while systematically dismantling the tax base that funded them. They offshore profits through intellectual property shell games, demand H-1B visas to suppress wages while opposing unions, and capture regulators through revolving doors and lobbying armies. When they face competition, they buy it. When they face regulation, they rewrite it. Their disruption is reserved for labor markets and competitors. Their own business models are fortified by moats of intellectual property, network effects, and regulatory capture that would be the envy of any medieval guild. The financial sector represents perhaps the purest expression of this privatized communism. Banks create money through fractional reserve lending, a privilege granted by the state, then charge interest on what is essentially a public utility. When their bets sour, they receive bailouts. When they succeed, they pay themselves bonuses that would fund small nations. The Federal Reserve, an institution theoretically independent but functionally captured by Wall Street, has made too big to fail the operating principle of American finance. Quantitative easing, printing money to buy assets, inflated the portfolios of the wealthy while wages stagnated. The free market in finance is a casino where the house is guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the United States, and the house always wins. What makes this system so durable is not merely its economic architecture, but its ideological machinery. The corporate oligarchy has invested billions in a propaganda apparatus, think tanks, media outlets, academic programs, political action committees, that teaches Americans to identify freedom with the absence of regulation for the powerful, independency with the presence of support for the powerless. A single mother receiving food stamps is a taker, a drain on the productive economy. A pharmaceutical company charging $600 for insulin that costs $6 to produce is a job creator, entitled to its profits by natural right. The worker who wants a union is a special interest. The CEO who buys a senator is exercising free speech. This is not logic, it is theology, and the god is Mammon. The vocabulary of personal responsibility is deployed with surgical precision. It applies to the worker whose factory moved to Mexico, the student crushed by debt, the patient bankrupted by medical bills. It never applies to the executive who lobbied for those trade deals, the university president who raised tuition 40 years running, or the hospital system that price gouges the uninsured. The market is a stern teacher for the poor, a generous patron for the rich. It demands sacrifice from those who have little and delivers abundance to those who have much. This is not to argue that all markets are illusory or that entrepreneurship is a myth. Genuine competition exists at the margins, among small businesses, in certain service sectors, and creative industries where barriers to entry remain low. But the commanding heights of the American economy are not occupied by entrepreneurs. They are held by a managerial class that has mastered the art of extracting wealth without bearing risk, of demanding freedom without accepting accountability. They have built a system that socializes their costs and privatizes their gains, that externalizes their harms and internalizes their benefits. In any honest accounting, this is not capitalism. It is a form of corporate feudalism, or if we are being generous, a selective and self-serving collectivism. The tragedy is that this system has poisoned the well of genuine economic debate. Because the oligarchy has co-opted the language of capitalism, criticism of their privileges is mischaracterized as hostility to markets themselves. Because they have demonized the language of the commons, proposals for shared prosperity are smeared as socialism or communism, terms that, in the mouths of billionaires who have never faced a market test in their lives, ring with comic irony. The result is a political culture where the only permitted argument is between two flavors of oligarchy, one that wants to deregulate everything, and one that wants to regulate everything in the oligarchy's favor. What would a genuine capitalism look like? It would begin with accountability. It would mean that when a corporation pollutes a river, its shareholders pay for the cleanup, not the taxpayers. It would mean that when a bank fails, its executives lose their homes, not just their jobs. It would mean that intellectual property protections expire faster, that antitrust laws are enforced with vigor, that subsidies are transparent and justified, and that the tax code does not reward offshoring and financial engineering. It would mean, above all, that the same rules apply to the powerful as apply to everyone else, that personal responsibility is not a cudgel for the poor but a standard for all. Until then, we live under a regime that has perfected the art of having it both ways. The corporate oligarchy practices a communism of the privilege, shared risk, guaranteed returns, state protection, and collective bargaining power reserved for those at the top. For everyone else, there is the free market, a euphemism for precarity, isolation, and the constant threat of ruin. The ideology insists that this is the natural order, the only alternative to the gulag. But the gulag, it turns out, was never the real threat. The real threat was always the concentration of power, the capture of the state by the wealthy, the transformation of citizens into subjects. And that transformation is complete not where the red flag flies, but where the quarterly earnings report is read aloud like scripture, and the only freedom that matters is the freedom of money to make more money by any means necessary with the bill sent to someone else.